The wind off the bighorns cut through Sheridan like a blade that morning, and Eliza Mercer felt every inch of it. She stood outside Garrett's Mercantile with her basket hanging empty from one arm and her pride hanging by a thread from the other. Inside, through the frosted window, she could see rows of canned goods, sacks of flour, slabs of bacon wrapped in butcher paper. All of it might as well have been on the moon. "No more credit, Mrs. Mercer." That's what Howard Garrett had said 15 minutes ago, his voice flat as a pan. Not cruel, not kind, just final. Eliza hadn't argued. Arguing required leverage, and she had none. Her late husband's homestead was mortgaged to the hilt. The creek that ran beside it froze solid every winter. The few chickens she'd managed to keep alive had stopped laying weeks ago. And Owen, her 7-year-old boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin, had gone to bed hungry last night and woken the same way this morning. She'd walked 3 miles into town with the last of her hope tucked inside that wicker basket, and now she was walking back with nothing. The street was busy despite the cold. Wagons rolled past, their wheels crunching through frozen mud. Men in heavy coats moved between the saloon and the land office. Women in finer dresses than Eliza had ever owned stepped carefully along the boardwalk, their gloved hands clutching parcels tied with string. No one looked at her. That was the unspoken mercy of poverty in a place like Sheridan. People didn't stare. They just looked past you, through you, as if you were a ghost already. Eliza pulled her shawl tighter and started walking. She made it 4 steps before she felt it, that prickling awareness that someone was watching. She stopped. Across the street, leaning against the post outside the telegraph office, stood a man she recognized instantly, even though she'd never spoken to him in her life. Beckett Kane. Everyone in the territory knew Beckett Kane. He owned Cane Ridge Ranch, a sprawling operation that stretched across 15,000 acres north of town. Cattle, horses, timber rights, water rights, the kind of wealth that didn't just buy comfort, it bought influence. Politicians came to him. Bankers deferred to him. And when he rode into Sheridan, people moved aside without being asked. He wasn't a tall man, but he carried himself like one. Broad through the shoulders, lean through the waist, with a face carved hard by wind and years and decisions that didn't allow for softness. His coat was fine wool beneath a layer of trail dust, and the gray horse tied beside him was worth more than most of the wagons on this street. And he was looking directly at Eliza, not past her, not through her, at her. Eliza's stomach twisted. She didn't know what was worse, being invisible or being seen by someone like him. Men with money didn't notice women like her unless they wanted something, and what they wanted was never good. She turned and kept walking. Behind her she heard boot falls on frozen dirt. "Ma'am." The voice was low, quiet, and entirely too close. Eliza stopped again but didn't turn around. Her hand tightened on the basket handle. "I don't want trouble," she said. "Neither do I." She turned then, slowly, and found Beckett Kane standing 3 feet away with his hands loose at his sides and his expression unreadable. Up close, he looked older than she'd expected. Not old, maybe 40, but weathered in the way men got when they spent more time outside than in. His eyes were pale gray, the color of winter sky, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to step back. She didn't. "Can I help you with something, Mr. Kane?" "I was about to ask you the same thing." Eliza blinked. "Excuse me?" "You've been standing outside Garrett's for near 20 minutes, Beckett said. "Figured you might need a hand with something." Heat flooded her face. Of course he'd been watching. Half the town had probably been watching. She was the poor widow with the empty basket and no credit, and now the richest man in the territory was making a spectacle of it. "I'm fine," Eliza said tightly. "Thank you." "You don't look fine. Then I'll work on my appearance." The words came out sharper than she intended, but Beckett didn't flinch. If anything, the corner of his mouth twitched, just barely, as if he'd almost smiled. "Wasn't talking about your appearance," he said. "I was talking about your basket." Eliza glanced down at the empty wicker, then back up at him. "What about it?" "It's empty." "So?" "So winter's coming on hard, and I'd wager you didn't walk 3 miles into town just to enjoy the scenery." Eliza's jaw tightened. "What I did or didn't come to town for isn't your concern." "Maybe not," Beckett agreed, But I'm making it my concern anyway. Why? For the first time, Beckett hesitated. Just a beat. Just long enough for Eliza to see something flicker across his face, something she couldn't name. Then he straightened and nodded toward the street. "Come with me," he said. "Let me put supper on your table." Eliza stared at him. Then she laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. It was bitter and sharp, and edged with something close to panic. "You want me to go with you?" she said slowly. "That's right. A man I've never spoken to before. Reckon we're speaking now. So you can put supper on my table." "That's the idea." Eliza shook her head and started walking again. "I'm not interested," Beckett followed. "In supper? In whatever you're offering." "I'm offering food." "No man offers food for free." "I do." Eliza spun to face him, and this time she didn't bother hiding the anger in her voice. "I don't need your charity, Mr. Kane. And I don't need you following me through town like I'm some kind of... Like you're hungry," Beckett interrupted. His voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath it now. "Because that's what I see. A woman who's too proud to beg and too stubborn to ask for help even when she needs it. You don't know anything about me. I know you've got a boy at home. I know your husband died 2 years back. I know you've been trying to work that creekside homestead on your own, and I know winter's going to bury you if you don't get provisions soon." Eliza's breath caught. "How do you—" "I pay attention." The words hung between them, heavy and strange. Eliza wanted to walk away. She wanted to tell this man to go back to his ranch and his money and his assumptions about who she was and what she needed. But Owen's face flickered through her mind. His hollow cheeks, his too quiet voice at breakfast when he'd said he wasn't hungry, even though they both knew he was. Beckett must have seen something shift in her expression because he took a step closer. "I'm not asking you to owe me anything," he said. "I'm asking you to let me do something decent, that's all." "Why?" "Because I can." It wasn't the answer she expected. It wasn't grand or romantic or wrapped in pretty words. It was blunt and simple, and somehow more unsettling than any lie would have been. Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't noticed before. Beckett Kane might have been the wealthiest man in the territory, but he looked tired, worn down, like a man who'd built an empire and discovered too late that empires were cold places to live. "1 meal," Eliza said finally. "That's all." Beckett nodded. "1 meal. And I'm not riding anywhere with you." "Fair enough. I'll bring the provisions to your place." You don't want charity. I heard you the first time." Beckett's voice softened just a fraction. "But your boy needs to eat, Mrs. Mercer, and I'm guessing you're not going to let pride stand in the way of that." Eliza hated that he was right. She hated even more that she was about to agree. "Fine," she said, "but you bring the supplies and you leave. I don't need company." "Understood." Beckett tipped his hat, a small, old-fashioned gesture that felt out of place coming from a man like him, and turned back toward his horse. Eliza watched him go, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Behind her, she heard whispers. Someone had been watching. Of course someone had been watching. This was Sheridan. Everyone watched everyone else, and a conversation between Beckett Kane and a penniless widow was going to be talked about from here to the Bighorns. Eliza didn't care. She'd just made a deal with the richest man in Wyoming, and she had no idea if she'd saved her son or damned them both. Beckett arrived at the Mercer homestead 2 hours later. Eliza had spent that time pacing the cabin like a caged animal, second-guessing every word she'd said and every decision that had led her to this moment. When she heard the creak of wagon wheels outside, her stomach dropped. She opened the door and froze. Beckett wasn't alone. Behind him, a freight wagon sat loaded with enough supplies to feed a family for a month. Sacks of flour, potatoes, smoked beef wrapped in canvas, coffee, sugar, salt pork, even a crate of canned peaches that must have cost more than Eliza made in a season. Owen stood beside her, his eyes wide as saucers. "Mama," he whispered, "is that all for us?" Eliza couldn't answer. Beckett climbed down from the wagon and walked toward them, his boots crunching through the frozen grass. "Told you I'd bring supper," he said. "This isn't supper," Eliza managed. "This is enough to get you through winter. I said 1 meal." "You did." Beckett glanced past her into the cabin, and Eliza saw his jaw tighten just slightly. The walls were rough-hewn logs with gaps where the chinking had crumbled away. The roof leaked in 3 places. The stove in the corner was older than Eliza and barely held heat. Beckett looked back at her. One meal wouldn't have done much good. That wasn't your decision to make. Maybe not, but it's done now. Eliza wanted to argue. She wanted to send him away and shove the supplies back onto his wagon and prove that she didn't need anyone's help. But Owen was already walking toward the crates, his small hands reaching out to touch the canvas-wrapped beef like it was something holy, and Eliza felt something inside her crack. "Thank you," she said quietly. Beckett nodded. "You're welcome." He started unloading the wagon. Eliza moved to help, but Beckett waved her off. "I've got it. I can carry—" "I know you can, but you don't have to." There was no condescension in his voice, no pity, just a flat, matter-of-fact certainty that unsettled her more than anything else he'd said. It took 20 minutes to unload everything. Beckett worked in silence, his movements efficient and practiced. He didn't ask where things should go. He didn't wait for direction. He just did it. When the last crate was stacked inside the cabin, he straightened and brushed the dust off his coat. "That should hold you," he said. "It will," Eliza replied. "More than hold us?" Beckett glanced around the cabin one more time, and Eliza saw his gaze linger on the broken harness hanging by the door, the cracked window panes stuffed with rags, the patch of roof where daylight showed through. "You need repairs," he said. "I'll manage." "I'm sure you will." Beckett turned toward the door, then paused. "But if you change your mind, I'm not hard to find." He left before Eliza could respond. She stood in the doorway and watched him climb back onto the wagon, snap the reins, and disappear down the rutted track that led back toward the main road. Owen tugged at her sleeve. "Mama," he said, "who was that man?" Eliza looked down at her son, at his thin face and his hopeful eyes, and realized she didn't have an answer. "I don't know," she said honestly. But 3 days later, when she woke to the sound of hammering outside, she found out. Beckett Kane was on her roof. Eliza stood in the doorway with her hair still loose from sleep and her mind still struggling to catch up with what she was seeing. The wealthiest rancher in Wyoming Territory was balanced on the peak of her cabin with a hammer in one hand and a bundle of new shingles stacked beside him. "What are you doing?" Eliza called up. Beckett glanced down. "Fixing your roof." "I didn't ask you to fix my roof." "Didn't need to. It's broken." "I'm aware. Then you're also aware it won't last the winter." Eliza opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again because he was right. The roof wouldn't last. She'd known that since September, but knowing and fixing were 2 different things when you didn't have money or time or help. "You can't just show up here and start working on my property," Eliza said. "Already did." "Mr. Kane?" "Beckett." "Excuse me?" "My name's Beckett. You keep calling me Mr. Kane like I'm your banker. You're not my anything." Beckett drove another nail home with 3 precise strikes. "Fair enough." Eliza crossed her arms. "I didn't ask for your help." "You mentioned that already." "And I don't need your charity, I know." Beckett set the hammer down and looked at her properly. "But here's the thing, Mrs. Mercer. I'm not doing this because I think you can't. I'm doing this because I can. And because standing around watching someone struggle when I've got the means to help doesn't sit right with me." "Why not?" "Why not what?" "Why doesn't it sit right with you?" Eliza stepped out into the yard, her boots crunching through frost. "You've got dozens of people working for you. You could send any one of them to do this. But you're here, on my roof, at dawn. Why?" Beckett didn't answer right away. He picked up another shingle, positioned it carefully, and drove 2 nails through the edge before he spoke again. "I don't know," he said finally. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to Eliza in months. She didn't know what to do with it. "I'll make coffee," she said. Beckett glanced down at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something that might have been surprise cross his face. "Appreciate it," he said. Eliza went inside and put the kettle on with hands that shook just slightly. Owen was still asleep in the corner, curled beneath 2 blankets and snoring softly. The supplies Beckett had brought were stacked neatly against the wall, more food than Eliza had seen in one place since before her husband died. She didn't understand this. She didn't understand why a man with everything would waste his time on a woman with nothing. But as she poured water into the kettle and listened to the steady rhythm of hammering above her head, Eliza realized something unsettling. She didn't want him to leave. Beckett finished the roof by mid-morning. Eliza brought him coffee twice and biscuits once, and each time he accepted with a quiet "thank you" that felt more genuine than anything Howard Garrett had ever said to her. When he finally climbed down, his coat was streaked with tar and his hands were blistered, but the roof was solid. "That'll hold," he said. "I can see that." Eliza hesitated. "How much do I owe you?" Beckett looked at her like she'd just suggested the sky was green. "Nothing. I'm not taking this for free. You're not taking anything. I'm giving it. That's not how the world works." "Maybe not." Beckett picked up his tools and started loading them back into his saddlebag. "But it's how I work." Eliza wanted to argue, but she was tired of arguing, tired of fighting, tired of being so damn proud that she couldn't see a kindness when it was offered. "Thank you," she said instead. Beckett paused, then nodded. "You're welcome." He swung up into the saddle, and Eliza thought that would be the end of it. But before he could ride away, Owen came running out of the cabin with something clutched in his hand. "Wait!" the boy called. Beckett reined his horse around. "What is it, son?" Owen held up a small wooden carving, a horse whittled from a piece of pine and sanded smooth. It was rough work, the kind a child makes with more enthusiasm than skill, but Eliza's heart twisted when she saw it. It was the only thing Owen owned that his father had made. "For you," Owen said, holding it up toward Beckett. Beckett stared at the carving for a long moment. Then he dismounted, crouched down to Owen's level, and took the horse with both hands like it was made of glass. "This is fine work," Beckett said quietly. "My papa made it." "He had good hands," Owen beamed. "Mama says I got his hands too." "Then you'll make fine things someday." Beckett slipped the carving into his coat pocket and stood. He looked at Eliza, and something passed between them, something unspoken and complicated and impossible to name. "I'll check on that harness next time," Beckett said. "Next time?" "Leather's cracked, won't hold through winter." "Mr. Kane said—" "Beckett." Eliza exhaled slowly. "Beckett, you don't have to keep coming back here." "I know." "Then why are you?" Beckett swung back into the saddle and looked down at her with those pale gray eyes that saw too much. "Because I want to," he said. And then he rode away, leaving Eliza standing in the yard with her son beside her and her world tilting in ways she couldn't control. Mochan. That night, after Owen was asleep, Eliza sat by the stove and stared at the new roof above her head. She thought about Beckett's hands, calloused and strong and blistered from work he didn't have to do. She thought about the way he'd looked at Owen's carving like it was treasure. She thought about the town and what they'd say when word got out that Beckett Kane had spent the morning on a widow's roof. And she thought about the question she'd asked him. "Why doesn't it sit right with you?" Because Eliza had spent 2 years learning how to be invisible, how to need nothing, how to survive on pride and stubbornness when there was nothing else left. But Beckett Kane had looked at her, truly looked at her, and seen something worth noticing. And that terrified her more than poverty ever had. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and whistling through the gaps in the walls. But the roof held, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eliza Mercer went to sleep without wondering if she'd wake to snow drifting through the ceiling. She woke instead to the sound of Beckett's voice outside, talking quietly to Owen about horses and leather and how to fix a harness that wouldn't quit. And despite everything, despite pride and fear and the whispers that would come, Eliza found herself smiling. Beckett came back 3 days later with leather for the harness and stayed until sunset. He came back the following week with fence posts and wire and spent 2 full days repairing the boundary line that had collapsed under snow the previous winter. He came back again after that, and again after that, until his visits stopped being surprising and started being something else entirely, something Eliza didn't have a name for and wasn't sure she wanted to find. The town noticed. Of course the town noticed. Sheridan was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business and wealthy enough that people had time to care about it. A man like Beckett Kane didn't spend his days working a failing homestead without tongues wagging from the mercantile to the saloon and back again. Eliza heard the whispers every time she went into town. She saw the looks. Some were curious, some were disapproving, and some, the ones that made her skin crawl, were knowing in a way that suggested people had already decided what was happening between her and Beckett, regardless of the truth. Entertaining himself with a poor widow, she'd heard Martha Simmons say outside the church 2 Sundays back. Shameful, really. A man like that should know better. Maybe she's the one doing the entertaining, Constance Hartley had replied, her voice dripping with implication. Widow with a child to feed and a rich man paying attention? Seems convenient. Eliza had walked past without stopping, her face burning and her hands clenched so tight her nails left marks in her palms. She didn't tell Beckett about the whispers. What would be the point? He had to know. A man like him didn't move through the world without understanding how people watched him, judged him, talked about him when his back was turned. But if Beckett heard the gossip, he didn't show it. He just kept coming. And Eliza kept letting him. It was a cold Thursday morning in late November when things shifted. Eliza was outside splitting firewood, a job she hated but couldn't avoid, when she heard hoofbeats on the frozen track. She looked up, expecting to see Beckett's gray horse, but instead found a wagon rolling toward the cabin with 2 men she didn't recognize sitting on the bench. Her stomach tightened. The wagon stopped 20 feet from the cabin, and the driver, a lean man with a narrow face and sharp eyes, climbed down. "Mrs. Mercer?" he called. "That's right. Name's Vernon Hale. This here's my associate, Mr. Pitts." He gestured to the second man, who remained seated and said nothing. "We're representing the Sheridan Land Development Company." Eliza set the axe down but didn't move closer. "I'm not interested in selling." "Didn't say you were." Vernon smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just thought we'd have a conversation." "About what?" "Your property." "I already told you." "We're prepared to make a very generous offer," Vernon interrupted. "More than generous, given the condition of the land." Eliza's jaw tightened. "My land isn't for sale." "Everything's for sale, Mrs. Mercer. It's just a matter of price." "Not this." Vernon's smile faded slightly. "You're struggling here. Everyone knows it. Winter's coming on hard, and you're barely keeping your head above water. We're offering you a way out." "I don't need a way out." "You sure about that?" Vernon glanced past her toward the cabin. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you could use all the help you can get." "I appreciate the concern," Eliza said, her voice flat. "But my answer's still no." Vernon exchanged a look with Pitts, then he pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and held it out. "At least look at the offer. You might change your mind." "I won't." "Mrs. Mercer, you need to leave." Vernon's expression hardened. "We're trying to help you." "By taking my home?" "By giving you money for land that's not worth the trouble it's causing you." Vernon took a step closer, and Eliza's hand moved instinctively toward the axe handle. "You've got a boy to think about, a boy who deserves better than this." "Don't," Eliza said quietly. "Don't you dare talk about my son." "I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying, and I'm telling you to get off my property before I make you regret coming here." Vernon stared at her for a long moment. Then he folded the paper and tucked it back into his coat. "Think about it," he said. "We'll be back." "Don't bother." Vernon climbed back onto the wagon, and Pitt snapped the reins without a word. They rolled away down the track, leaving Eliza standing alone in the cold with her heart pounding and her hands shaking. She didn't know who the Sheridan Land Development Company was, but she had a pretty good idea why they'd come. Beckett arrived less than an hour later and found her still standing in the yard, staring at the spot where the wagon had been. "What happened?" he asked, swinging down from his horse. "Nothing." "Eliza." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the sound of it in his voice made something twist in her chest. "Some men came by," she said. "Wanted to buy the land." Beckett's expression went very still. "What men?" "Vernon Hale. Said he was with the Sheridan Land Development Company." "What did you tell him?" "I told him no." And he said he'd be back." Beckett was quiet for a moment. Then he said very carefully, "This is my fault." "How is it your fault?" "Because people see me here. They see me working your land, helping with repairs, spending time with you and Owen. and they're drawing conclusions. Let them. It's not that simple. Beckett rubbed a hand across his jaw. Men like Vernon Hale don't show up at a struggling homestead offering money unless they think there's profit in it. And right now, the only reason your land looks profitable is because I'm here. Eliza felt something cold settle in her stomach. You think he's trying to buy my land because he thinks you're interested in it? I think he's trying to buy your land because he knows I'm interested in you. The words hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Eliza's breath caught. Beckett, I'm not blind, Eliza, and neither are they. Beckett gestured toward the road. Every time I come here, I'm making you a target. For men like Vernon who think they can profit from it. For gossips who think they know what's happening between us. For people who see you as weak and me as foolish. I don't care what people think. Maybe you should. Why? Eliza stepped toward him, anger sparking in her chest. Because it's inconvenient for you? Because it's damaging your reputation to be seen with someone like me? That's not what I... Then what are you saying? Beckett looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain, lost, like a man standing at a crossroads with no map and no idea which direction led anywhere worth going. I'm saying I don't know how to do this, he said finally. Do what? Be around you without making things worse. Eliza's anger faltered. You're not making things worse. Vernon Hale showing up here says otherwise. Vernon Hale is a vulture. He would have shown up eventually whether you were here or not. Maybe. Beckett shook his head. But I gave him a reason to show up now. So what are you suggesting? That you stop coming here? That you walk away and let me handle this on my own? I'm suggesting that maybe I'm being selfish. Selfish how? By coming here because I want to, not because you need me to. Eliza stared at him. You think I don't need you? I think you'd manage without me. That's not the same thing. Beckett frowned. What do you mean? I mean, managing and needing aren't the same thing. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the layers she wore. I've spent 2 years managing Beckett, 2 years doing everything myself because I didn't have a choice. And yes, I can keep doing that if I have to, but that doesn't mean I don't need... She stopped. Beckett waited. I don't need your money, Eliza said quietly. I don't need your land or your influence or your ability to fix every broken thing on this property. But I need you to stop acting like the only reason you're here is to rescue me. Because if that's all this is, if you're just some wealthy rancher playing hero with a poor widow, then Vernon Hale is right. You're wasting your time and I'm wasting mine. Beckett took a step closer. Is that what you think this is? I don't know what this is. Neither do I. Beckett's voice dropped. But I know it's not charity, and it's not pity. And it sure as hell isn't boredom. Then what is it? I told you before, I don't know. That's not good enough. It's all I've got. Eliza wanted to push him, wanted to demand a better answer, a clearer explanation, some kind of certainty in a world that had given her nothing but uncertainty for 2 solid years. But when she looked at Beckett, really looked at him, she saw the same confusion reflected back at her. He didn't know why he kept coming here any more than she knew why she kept letting him. And somehow, that made it worse and better all at once. Owen asks about you, Eliza said after a long silence. Beckett blinked. What? Every morning? Is Mr. Kane coming today? Every night. When's Mr. Kane coming back? He carved you another horse last week, spent 3 days on it. Won't let me see it because he wants to give it to you himself. Something shifted in Beckett's expression, something soft and unguarded that made Eliza's throat tighten. He's a good boy, Beckett said quietly. He is. And he's already lost one man who mattered to him. I won't let him lose another. Eliza? So if you're going to walk away, do it now, before he gets any more attached. Before I... She stopped herself. Before you what? Eliza shook her head. It doesn't matter. It does to me. Why? Because you matter to me. The words came out simple and unadorned, and they hit Eliza like a fist to the chest. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Owen came running out of the cabin with his coat half-buttoned and his face bright with excitement. Mr. Kane, he shouted, you came back! Beckett turned, and the uncertainty on his face vanished, replaced by something warmer. Course I did. Told you I would. Owen skidded to a stop in front of him, breathless and grinning. I finished it. Finished what? Owen pulled a small wooden horse from his pocket, carefully carved and sanded smooth, better than the first one by a mile. He held it up with both hands, like an offering. "For you," Owen said. Beckett crouched down and took the horse carefully. He turned it over in his hands, studying the details. The carved mane, the bent legs mid-gallop, the way Owen had whittled the tail to look like it was streaming in the wind. "This is real fine work, Owen," Beckett said. "Best I've seen." Owen beamed. "Mama helped with the sanding." "Did she now?" "Just a little," Eliza said quickly. Beckett glanced up at her, and something passed between them, something too complicated to name but impossible to ignore. "Well, I'll treasure it," Beckett said, slipping the horse into his coat pocket beside the first one. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Owen hesitated, then blurted out, "Are you staying for supper?" Eliza's heart stopped. Beckett looked at her, a question in his eyes. And Eliza realized she was standing at her own crossroads. She could say no, could send Beckett away and protect herself and Owen from whatever this was before it became something neither of them could walk away from. Or she could say yes. "We're having stew," Eliza heard herself say. "Nothing fancy, but there's enough if you're hungry." Beckett stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm hungry." Owen whooped and grabbed Beckett's hand, dragging him toward the cabin. And Eliza followed, her heart pounding and her hands shaking and her mind screaming that this was a mistake, even as every other part of her insisted it was exactly right. Supper was awkward at first. The cabin was small, and the table barely fit 3 people. Owen chattered constantly, asking Beckett questions about horses and cattle, and whether it was true that Cane Ridge Ranch had a barn bigger than the Sheridan Land Office. Beckett answered patiently, his voice steady and kind, and Eliza found herself watching the way he looked at her son, like Owen was someone worth listening to instead of a child to be tolerated. It had been a long time since anyone looked at Owen that way. It had been a long time since anyone looked at her that way either. "Your mama makes good stew," Beckett said at one point, and Owen nodded enthusiastically. "She makes everything good, even when we don't got much." Eliza's face flushed. "Owen, it's true. You said so yourself. You said we gotta make do with what we got, and you always make it good." Beckett met Eliza's eyes across the table. "He's right. It's just stew." "No," Beckett said quietly. "It's not." After supper, Owen fell asleep by the stove wrapped in blankets, worn out from excitement and a full stomach. Eliza and Beckett sat at the table in the dim lamplight, the silence between them less awkward now, but still heavy with things unsaid. "Thank you," Eliza said finally, "for staying. Thank you for letting me. Owen likes you. I like him too." Eliza traced a finger along a crack in the table. "He doesn't remember his father much. Not really. Just pieces. The way he smelled, the sound of his voice, but not the man himself." "How long's it been?" 2 years this past summer." "What happened?" "Fever." Eliza's voice was flat. "Came on fast. He was gone in 3 days." "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry." Eliza looked up. "But sorry doesn't bring him back, and it doesn't pay the mortgage or fix the roof or put food on the table." "No," Beckett agreed. "It doesn't." So I stopped waiting for sorry to mean something, and I started doing what needed to be done. "You've done a hell of a job." Eliza laughed bitterly. "Have I? Because from where I'm sitting, I'm barely keeping this place together. The land's half wild. The cabin's falling apart. I can't pay my debts. And men like Vernon Hale are circling like I'm already dead." "You're still here," Beckett said. "That counts for something." "Does it?" "Yeah, it does." Eliza wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that surviving was enough. That just hanging on through sheer stubbornness and will had value beyond the simple fact of still breathing. But she was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of scraping by, tired of pretending she was strong enough to do this alone when every day proved she wasn't. "Why are you really here, Beckett?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "I told you, I don't know. That's still not good enough." "Then let me tell you what I do know." Beckett leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "I know I've got more money than I'll ever spend. I know I've got land and cattle and men who work for me and people who listen when I talk. I know I built an empire that's supposed to mean something. But I come home to an empty house every night. I eat meals alone. I sit by a fire that's bigger than this whole cabin and feel colder than I've ever felt in my life. And I look around at everything I've built and realize I don't have anyone to share it with. No one who looks at me and sees anything other than money or power or something they can use. Eliza's chest tightened. That's not why I know. Beckett's eyes met hers. That's why I keep coming back. Because I don't care about your money? Because you see me. Not what I own, not what I can do for you. Just me. Eliza didn't know what to say to that. She'd spent so long thinking of Beckett Kane as the wealthiest man in the territory, as someone fundamentally different from her, someone who lived in a world she could never touch, that she'd never considered he might be lonely. But looking at him now, sitting at her broken table in her drafty cabin with firelight catching the gray in his hair and the lines around his eyes, she saw it clearly. Beckett Kane had everything. And somehow that had left him with nothing. I see you, Eliza said quietly, but I don't know what you want me to do about it. I don't want you to do anything. Then what are we doing here? Beckett was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and reached for his coat. I should go, he said. Panic flared in Eliza's chest. Beckett, it's late, and I've already taken up enough of your evening. That's not... Eliza stood too, her hands clenched at her sides. Don't do that. Do what? Run away the second things get complicated. I'm not running. Aren't you? Beckett stopped with his coat half on and looked at her, and for the first time Eliza saw something that looked like pain cross his face. I don't know how to do this, Eliza, he said again. I don't know how to be around you without wanting things I've got no right to want. What things? You. This. He gestured at the cabin, at Owen sleeping by the stove, at the table still cluttered with supper dishes. A life that means something beyond ledgers and land deeds, and men who call me sir because they're paid to. Eliza's breath caught. You think I can give you that? I think you already have. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying. Eliza wanted to step forward, wanted to close the distance and touch him, and prove that this wasn't just in her head, that whatever was happening between them was real. But she was afraid. Afraid of wanting something she couldn't keep. Afraid of letting someone in only to lose them again. Afraid of being wrong about Beckett, the way she'd been wrong about so many other things. I can't promise you anything, she said finally. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? Beckett pulled his coat the rest of the way on and buttoned it slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm asking if I can keep coming back, he said. That's all. Even if I can't give you what you want? Even then. Eliza searched his face for doubt, for hesitation, for some sign that he didn't mean it. She found none. Yes, she said. You can keep coming back. Beckett nodded once, sharp and certain. Then he walked to the door, paused with his hand on the latch, and looked back at her. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you already gave me something I wanted. What? Supper with people who wanted me here. Not because of what I own, just because. He left before Eliza could respond. She stood in the empty cabin listening to the sound of hoofbeats fading into the night, and realized she was crying. Not from sadness, from something else entirely. The following week, Vernon Hale came back. This time he brought 4 men with him and didn't bother with pleasantries. Mrs. Mercer, he said, climbing down from his wagon, we need to talk. Eliza was outside hanging laundry, and she didn't stop working. I told you last time, my land's not for sale. And I told you we'd be back. Doesn't change my answer. Vernon gestured to the men behind him. These gentlemen represent investors from back east. They're very interested in this property. Good for them. Mrs. Mercer, you're trespassing. Vernon's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. That's my business. Is it? Vernon stepped closer. Because from where I'm standing, you're holding on to a piece of land you can't afford to keep just because some cattleman's been filling your head with ideas about what it's worth. Eliza stopped folding laundry and turned to face him fully. What I do with my land has nothing to do with Beckett Kane. Doesn't it? Vernon smiled coldly. Everyone in town knows he's been spending time here. Everyone knows he's fixing your fences and patching your roof and playing house with your boy. And everyone knows that means this land's about to become a lot more valuable. You're wrong. Am I? Then why is he here? That's none of your concern. It is when it drives up the price we have to pay. Eliza's hands clenched around the wet fabric. Get off my property. We're prepared to offer double what we said last time, triple, if you sign today. I don't care if you offer 10 times that. My answer's still no. Vernon's jaw tightened. You're a fool. Maybe. But I'm a fool who owns her own land. Can you say the same? One of the men behind Vernon snorted, and Vernon's face flushed red. This isn't over, he said. Yes, Eliza replied. It is. Vernon stared at her for a long moment. Then he climbed back onto the wagon and snapped the reins hard enough to make the horses jump. They rolled away in a cloud of dust and anger, and Eliza stood alone in the yard with her heart racing and her hands shaking so badly she had to sit down. She didn't know who those investors were, but she knew they weren't going to stop coming. And she knew, with a certainty that made her stomach twist, that this was only going to get worse before it got better. Beckett found her an hour later still sitting in the yard with unfolded laundry in a basket beside her. What happened? He asked, swinging down from his horse. Vernon Hale came back. Beckett's expression went dark. And he offered me triple what he offered last time. What did you tell him? The same thing I told him before. No. Beckett crouched down in front of her. Eliza, don't. She looked at him, and her voice cracked. Don't tell me I should have taken it. Don't tell me it was a good offer. Don't tell me I'm being stubborn or foolish or too proud to see sense. I wasn't going to say any of that. Then what were you going to say? I was going to ask if you're okay. Eliza laughed, but it came out wrong, sharp and brittle and dangerously close to a sob. No, I'm not okay. I'm scared and angry and so tired of fighting that I can barely stand it, but I'm not selling my land to men who only want it because they think you want it. They're not wrong. Eliza stared at him. What? I do want it. Beckett's voice was steady. Not to own, not to buy. But I want this place to survive. I want you to keep it. I want Owen to grow up here and learn to work this land the way his father would have wanted, and I want to help make that happen. Why? Because it matters. To who? To you, which means it matters to me. Eliza felt something inside her break, something she'd been holding together through sheer force of will for longer than she could remember. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. Do what? Trust you. Trust this. Trust that you're not going to wake up one day and realize you've wasted enough time on a poor widow and her falling apart homestead. Beckett reached out slowly and took her hands in his. His palms were rough and warm, and Eliza realized she was freezing. I'm not going anywhere, he said. You don't know that. Yes, I do. How? Beckett was quiet for a moment. Then he said very carefully, because for the first time in 10 years, I don't feel like I'm living someone else's life. I feel like I'm living mine. Eliza's breath caught. I built Cane Ridge because that's what my father expected, Beckett continued. I made money because that's what successful men do. I hired workers and bought land and became someone people respected because that's what power looks like. But none of it ever felt like mine. It felt like a role I was playing, a part I was supposed to fill. And now? Now I come here and Owen shows me a horse he carved, and you make supper from scraps and turn it into something good. And I sit at that table in that tiny cabin and feel more at home than I've ever felt in my life. Beckett's hands tightened on hers. So no, I'm not going to wake up and walk away, because this is the first real thing I've had in a decade, and I'll be damned if I let it go without a fight. Eliza didn't realize she was crying until Beckett reached up and wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumb. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. Of what? Of ruining this. Of pushing too hard or not hard enough. Of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing and losing you before I ever really had you. You haven't lost me. Haven't I? Eliza shook her head. No, you're still here. So are you. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, eyes locked. The world narrowed down to just the two of them and the fragile, terrifying thing growing between them. Then Owen's voice called from inside the cabin. Mama, Is Mr. Kane here? Eliza pulled back, wiping her eyes quickly. Out here, sweetheart. Owen came running out with his coat on backwards and his face bright with excitement. Can Mr. Kane help me with the chicken coop? The door's stuck again. Beckett stood and looked down at Eliza. Can I? Eliza nodded, not trusting her voice. Beckett followed Owen toward the coop, and Eliza watched them go. The wealthy rancher and the fatherless boy walking side by side like it was the most natural thing in the world. And she realized something that both terrified and comforted her in equal measure. She wasn't alone anymore. For better or worse, Beckett Kane had become part of her life, and she had no idea what came next. The first snow came early that year, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, and it came hard. Eliza woke to a world buried under 8 inches of white and a wind that howled through the gaps in the cabin walls like something alive and angry. She lit the stove with numb fingers and checked on Owen, who was still asleep under every blanket they owned, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The chickens needed feeding, the water barrel had frozen solid, and the woodpile she'd spent October building was already looking smaller than it should. Winter had arrived, and it wasn't playing games. She was outside breaking ice off the water pump when she heard it, the sound of a horse struggling through deep snow. She looked up expecting to see Beckett, but the rider who emerged from the white wasn't alone. Beckett led his gray, and behind him, 2 pack horses loaded with supplies followed on lead ropes. Eliza straightened, her breath fogging in the cold air. What's all this? Winter provisions, Beckett said, swinging down. Snow clung to his coat and hat, and his face was red from the wind. Figured you'd need extra with the storm coming in. Storm? This isn't the storm? This is just the warning. Beckett started unloading the first pack horse. Real storm's supposed to hit tomorrow night. Could last 3-4 days, maybe longer. Eliza's stomach dropped. How do you know? Old Jim Bridger came through Cane Ridge yesterday. Man can read weather like most people read newsprint. Says this winter's going to be a killer. That's encouraging. Wasn't meant to be, was meant to be true. Beckett hefted a sack of grain onto his shoulder. Which is why I'm here. To bring supplies? To make sure you're ready. It took an hour to unload everything. Flour, cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans, canned vegetables, coffee, sugar, and enough firewood to keep the stove burning for a month. Beckett worked without talking, his movements efficient despite the cold, and Eliza helped where she could while trying not to think about what all of this must have cost. When the last of it was stacked inside the cabin, Beckett stood by the door brushing snow from his coat while Owen danced around the new supplies like it was Christmas morning. Look, Mama. Owen held up a tin of peaches. Can we have these tonight? Maybe tomorrow, Eliza said, then looked at Beckett. Thank you. Again. You keep saying that. You keep giving me reasons to. Beckett glanced out at the falling snow. I should get back before this gets worse. You're riding back to Cane Ridge in this? I've ridden in worse. That doesn't make it smart. Beckett smiled faintly. Never claimed to be smart. Owen tugged at his coat. You could stay here. Mama wouldn't mind. Eliza's face burned. Owen. What? We got extra food now. And Mr. Kane could sleep by the stove like he did that one time when he fell asleep after fixing the door. Beckett looked at Eliza, one eyebrow raised. I fell asleep? For about 10 minutes, Eliza said quickly. You were exhausted. I didn't want to wake you. Mama covered you with a blanket, Owen added helpfully. And she said you looked peaceful. Owen, that's enough. But it's true. Beckett's smile widened, and Eliza wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. I appreciate the offer, Beckett said to Owen. But I've got men at the ranch who'll worry if I don't make it back. You could send someone to tell them, Owen argued. Then you wouldn't have to ride in the snow. Owen, Eliza said more firmly, Mr. Kane needs to go home. But enough. Owen's face fell, and he retreated to the corner where his carved horses lived, leaving an awkward silence in his wake. Beckett pulled on his gloves. Storm's supposed to hit hard tomorrow. If you need anything, we'll be fine. Eliza. She looked at him. If you need anything, he said again, slower this time, you send Owen to the ridge. Road might be buried, but he can follow the creek bed. My men know to watch for him. I'm not sending my son out in a blizzard. Then you come yourself. I'm not leaving Owen alone. Then wait it out here. But if something goes wrong, if the roof caves or the stove cracks or you run out of wood, you don't try to handle it yourself. You understand? Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she'd handled worse on her own and would keep handling it no matter what winter threw at her. But the look on Beckett's face stopped her. He wasn't being condescending. He was being afraid. "I understand," she said quietly. Beckett nodded once, then left without another word. Eliza stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the white, and felt something twist in her chest that had nothing to do with cold and everything to do with the way he'd looked at her before riding away, like leaving hurt. The storm hit the next night exactly when Beckett said it would. Eliza had spent the day preparing, reinforcing the door with extra wood, stuffing rags into every gap in the walls, moving the woodpile closer to the cabin so she wouldn't have to venture far in the worst of it. Owen helped without complaint, his small hands surprisingly capable when given clear tasks. By sunset, the wind was screaming. By midnight, the world outside had disappeared entirely. Eliza kept the stove burning and tried not to think about how much wood they were going through. She'd rationed carefully, but this storm was eating fuel faster than she'd anticipated, and if it lasted more than 3 days, they'd be in trouble. Owen slept fitfully, waking every few hours when the wind shook the cabin hard enough to rattle the dishes. Each time, Eliza soothed him back to sleep with quiet words and a hand on his hair, even though she felt just as frightened as he looked. The second day was worse. Snow piled against the door until Eliza had to shove it open with her full weight just to see outside. The world beyond was nothing but white chaos, wind and snow so thick she couldn't see the chicken coop 20 feet away. She fought her way to the woodpile, grabbed as much as she could carry, and stumbled back to the cabin with her face numb and her lungs burning from the cold. Inside, Owen was crying. "Mama!" He threw himself at her the moment she closed the door. "I thought you weren't coming back." "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." Eliza held him tight, snow melting off her coat and puddling on the floor. "I'm not going anywhere." But even as she said it, she felt the lie of it, because if this storm lasted much longer, they were going to run out of wood. And without wood, they'd freeze. The third day, the stove started smoking. Eliza tried everything, adjusting the flue, clearing the pipe, banking the fire differently. But nothing worked. Smoke poured into the cabin until her eyes watered, and Owen couldn't stop coughing. She finally gave up and let the fire die down to coals, which meant the cabin got cold fast. Too cold. Owen huddled under blankets by the dying stove, his lips tinged blue, and Eliza made a decision she'd sworn she wouldn't make. "Put your coat on," she told Owen. "Why?" "We're going to Cane Ridge." Owen's eyes went wide. "In the storm?" "The storm's dying down." It wasn't, really, but it was lighter than it had been, and Eliza didn't have a choice anymore. "We'll follow the creek like Mr. Kane said. It's not far." "Mama, I'm scared." "I know, baby. Me too. But we can't stay here." It took 15 minutes to bundle Owen in every warm thing he owned. Eliza wrapped a scarf around his face until only his eyes showed, then did the same to herself. She tucked what little food they could carry into a sack, doused the last of the coals in the stove, and opened the door. The wind hit like a fist. Eliza grabbed Owen's hand and pulled him forward, her other hand gripping the door frame for balance. Snow immediately plastered itself to her face, and the cold was so intense it hurt to breathe. "Stay close," she shouted over the wind. Owen nodded, his small hand clenched tight in hers. They made it 10 feet before Eliza realized this was a mistake. The world was completely white. She couldn't see the creek, couldn't see the tree line, couldn't see anything except swirling snow and the vague dark shape of the cabin behind them growing fainter by the second. "Mama!" Owen's voice was barely audible. "I can't see! I know! Just hold on to me!" Eliza took another step and felt her boot break through a crust of ice. She stumbled, nearly fell, caught herself on what she thought was a fence post but turned out to be a snow-covered bush that bent under her weight. They were lost. Less than 30 feet from the cabin, and they were already lost. Panic clawed at her throat. She couldn't go forward. She had no idea which direction forward even was. But she couldn't go back either because she'd already lost sight of the cabin. "Mama?" Owen's voice was small and terrified. "What do we do?" Eliza didn't have an answer, and then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Impossible. No one would be out in this. No one would be crazy enough to ride through a blizzard that had buried the valley under 3 feet of snow. But the sound got closer. And then, through the white, a shape emerged. A man on a gray horse, wrapped in so many layers he looked twice his normal size, his face covered except for his eyes. Beckett. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted, swinging down from the horse. "The stove quit," Eliza shouted back. "We were trying to get to the ridge." "You would have died before you made it halfway." Beckett grabbed Owen and lifted him onto the horse in one smooth motion, then turned to Eliza. "Get on." "I can walk." "Like hell you can. Get on the damn horse." Eliza was too cold and too scared to argue. She let Beckett lift her up behind Owen, then felt him swing up behind her, his arms coming around both of them to grip the reins. "Hold tight," he shouted. The horse turned, and Eliza caught one last glimpse of the cabin before it vanished completely into the white. The ride to Cane Ridge was the longest 20 minutes of Eliza's life. She couldn't feel her feet, couldn't feel her hands. Owen was shaking so hard against her chest, she was afraid he'd fall off the horse, despite Beckett's arms around them both. The wind screamed, the snow fell, and Beckett rode through it like a man possessed, his body a solid wall of warmth at her back, and his voice a steady murmur in her ear, telling her to hold on, just hold on. They were almost there. When the ranch house finally appeared through the storm, Eliza nearly wept with relief. Beckett pulled the horse right up to the porch and shouted something she couldn't hear. A door flew open and 2 men rushed out to help. Someone took Owen. Someone else took Eliza. And then she was inside, surrounded by warmth and light and the smell of coffee and wood smoke. She collapsed onto something soft, a chair maybe, or a sofa, and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, Owen was wrapped in blankets by a fireplace big enough to stand in, and Beckett was crouched in front of her with a cup of something hot pressed into her hands. "Drink," he said. Eliza drank. It was coffee laced with something stronger, and it burned all the way down. "Owen?" she managed. "He's fine. One of the men's getting him dry clothes. The cabin can wait." "But Eliza." Beckett's hands closed over hers, steadying the cup. "It can wait." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw that his face was raw from the wind, his lips cracked, his eyes red-rimmed from cold. "You came for us," she said. "Of course I did." "How did you know?" I didn't. I just had a feeling." Beckett's jaw tightened. Storm was worse than old Jim said. "I kept thinking about you out there in that cabin with the wind tearing at it, and I couldn't—" He stopped, shook his head. "I couldn't stay away." "You could have died." "So could you." "I had no choice." "Neither did I." Eliza stared at him, and something shifted inside her chest. Something fundamental and irrevocable. This man had ridden through a blizzard that could have killed him because he'd been worried about her. Not because she owed him, not because he wanted something from her, just because. "Thank you," she whispered. Beckett's hands tightened on hers. "You're welcome." One of the ranch hands appeared with an armful of dry clothes, a shirt and pants that would swallow Eliza whole, but anything was better than what she was wearing. "Mrs. Patterson's drawing a bath upstairs," the man said. "Said to tell you to take your time." Eliza blinked. "Mrs. Patterson?" "Housekeeper," Beckett said. "She runs this place better than I do." "I can't impose—" "You're not imposing. You're staying." "Beckett, the storm's not done yet. Could last another 2 days. You're not going back to that cabin until it's over, and I've had a chance to fix whatever went wrong with your stove. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm telling you." Beckett stood and pulled her to her feet. "Now go get warm before you catch pneumonia." Eliza wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. Her legs were shaking, her teeth chattering, and every inch of her hurt from the cold. So she let the ranch hand lead her upstairs to a bathroom with a porcelain tub and hot water that felt like heaven against her frozen skin. She soaked until her fingers pruned and the shaking finally stopped, then dressed in the borrowed clothes and made her way back downstairs. Owen was asleep on the sofa by the fire, his face peaceful for the first time in days. Beckett sat in a chair nearby, staring into the flames with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up when Eliza entered. "Feel better?" "Yes." "Thank you." "Mrs. Patterson's making supper. Should be ready soon." Eliza sat in the chair opposite him, suddenly aware of how enormous this room was. The ceilings were high enough to make her dizzy. The furniture was dark wood and leather, expensive but worn in the way that suggested use rather than display. Books lined one wall. A piano sat in the corner gathering dust. It was beautiful, and it felt empty. "This is your home," Eliza said. "This is my house," Beckett corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yeah." He took a sip of whiskey. "A house is just walls and a roof. A home is what you were trying to get back to when you walked out into that storm." Eliza looked at Owen sleeping peacefully, his small chest rising and falling beneath the blankets. "I almost killed him," she said quietly. "No, you almost saved him. There's a difference there, too. I should have waited. Should have trusted you'd come. You did what you thought you had to do. Can't fault someone for that." "You can when it's stupid." Beckett smiled faintly. "Then I've been stupid plenty of times." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the wind howl outside. The storm hadn't let up at all. If anything, it sounded worse. But inside Cane Ridge, Eliza felt safe for the first time in days. "Why do you live here alone?" she asked. Beckett glanced at her. "What do you mean? This house is huge. You've got room for a dozen people, but it's just you and Mrs. Patterson and the ranch hands in the bunkhouse. Never needed more than that." "That's not an answer." Beckett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I inherited this place when I was 25. My father died, my mother was already gone, and suddenly I was responsible for 15,000 acres and 100 head of cattle and men who expected me to know what I was doing." "Did you?" "No, but I learned fast." He swirled the whiskey in his glass. "Built the operation up. Made money. Made a name for myself. And somewhere along the way, I forgot what any of it was for." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I built an empire, and then I looked around and realized I had no one to share it with. No wife, no children, no family. Just employees and business associates and people who wanted things from me." Eliza's chest tightened. "You could have changed that." "Could I?" Beckett looked at her. "You think it's easy finding someone who wants you instead of what you own?" "No, I think it's terrifying." "Then you understand why I stopped trying." "Until now?" Beckett's eyes held hers. "Until now." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them seemed ready to fully acknowledge. Eliza wanted to ask what he meant. Wanted to know if she was reading too much into every look and every word, or if this thing between them was as real as it felt. But before she could find the courage, Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway. "Supper's ready, Mr. Kane." "Thank you, Margaret." The housekeeper was a sturdy woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense air about her. She looked at Eliza with open curiosity, but said nothing beyond, "I set places for 3 in the dining room." "We can eat in here," Beckett said. "No need for formality." "As you wish." Mrs. Patterson returned a few minutes later with trays laden with beef stew, fresh bread, and coffee that smelled strong enough to wake the dead. Owen stirred when the food arrived, and within minutes he was sitting up and eating like he hadn't seen a meal in weeks. "Slow down," Eliza said. "You'll make yourself sick." "But it's so good," Owen said through a mouthful of bread. "It's still going to be good if you chew it." Beckett smiled and passed Owen more bread. "Let him eat. Growing boys need fuel." They ate in comfortable silence, the storm raging outside while warmth and food filled the gaps cold and fear had carved into them over the past 3 days. When they were finished, Owen yawned so wide his jaw cracked. "Someone's tired," Beckett observed. "I'm not tired," Owen protested, then yawned again. "Mrs. Patterson made up the guest room," Beckett said to Eliza. 2 beds. You and Owen can stay there tonight." "We can't." "You can, and you will." Beckett's voice was firm. "Storm's not letting up, and I'm not sending you back out there." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." Eliza wanted to argue, but the truth was she didn't have the strength. And Owen was already half asleep again, leaning against her shoulder with his eyes closed. "Thank you," she said for what felt like the 100th time. "Stop thanking me." "I can't seem to help it." Beckett stood and held out a hand. "Come on, I'll show you to your room." Eliza let him pull her to her feet, then scooped Owen into her arms. He mumbled something incoherent and wrapped his arms around her neck, already more asleep than awake. Beckett led them upstairs to a room that was bigger than Eliza's entire cabin. Two beds with thick quilts sat against one wall. A fireplace crackled in the corner. Windows overlooked the valley, though all Eliza could see through them was white. "If you need anything, my room's at the end of the hall," Beckett said. "We'll be fine." Beckett hesitated in the doorway. "Eliza?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you're here." "Even though I was stupid enough to walk out into a blizzard?" "Even then." He left before she could respond. Eliza tucked Owen into one of the beds, then sat on the edge of the other and stared at the fire. She was in Beckett Kane's house, sleeping in his guest room, safe and warm while her cabin sat buried in snow with a broken stove and probably a collapsed roof by now. She should have felt grateful. Instead, she felt trapped. Not by Beckett, never by Beckett, but by the situation. By the slow, inexorable realization that she was becoming dependent on him in ways that terrified her. Because what happened when the storm ended? What happened when she went back to her cabin and he went back to his life? What happened when this fragile, impossible thing between them had to face the real world again? Eliza didn't have answers. All she had was the sound of Owen's breathing, the warmth of the fire, and the knowledge that somewhere down the hall, Beckett Kane was probably lying awake asking himself the same questions. The storm lasted 4 more days. 4 days of being trapped in Cane Ridge with nothing to do but eat Mrs. Patterson's cooking, watch Owen explore every corner of the massive house, and try not to think about how easy it would be to get used to this. Beckett spent most of his time working, going over ledgers in his office, meeting with his foreman about the cattle, checking on the horses in the barn despite the weather. But he always appeared for meals, and he always made time for Owen, who followed him around like a devoted puppy whenever he was allowed. On the 3rd day, Eliza found them in the barn. Owen was sitting on a hay bale watching Beckett brush down one of the horses, a big chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face. "She's beautiful," Owen breathed. "She is," Beckett agreed. "Got her from a breeder in Colorado 3 years back. Best cutting horse I've ever owned." "What's a cutting horse?" "A horse that can separate a single cow from a herd. Takes intelligence and speed and a lot of training." "Can I try?" Beckett smiled. "Maybe when you're bigger. Right now, you'd need a stepladder just to reach the stirrups." Owen's face fell slightly, and Beckett seemed to notice. "Tell you what," he said. "How about I teach you to brush her? That's just as important as riding." Owen's face lit up. "Really?" "Really. Come here." Beckett showed Owen how to hold the brush, how to work with the grain of the horse's coat, how to be gentle but firm. Owen listened with the kind of intense focus children reserve for things they care deeply about, and Eliza felt something crack inside her chest. This was what Owen had been missing. Not just a father, though he'd lost that too, but a man who saw him as someone worth teaching, someone worth time and patience and care. Beckett glanced up and saw Eliza watching. "How long have you been standing there?" he asked. "Long enough." "Am I doing it right, Mama?" Owen called. "Am I brushing good?" "You're doing perfectly, sweetheart." Eliza walked closer, and the mare nickered softly, her dark eyes calm and curious. "She likes you," Beckett said. "How can you tell?" "Ears forward, relaxed posture. If she didn't like you, you'd know." Eliza reached out tentatively and touched the mare's neck. Her coat was warm and smooth, and something about the simple act of touching another living creature made Eliza's throat tighten. "I never learned to ride," she admitted. Beckett looked surprised. "Never?" "My father didn't own horses, couldn't afford them, and after I married, there was never time." "I could teach you." "I'm probably too old to learn." "You're not old." "I'm 32. "That's not old. That's barely started." Eliza laughed despite herself. "You have a generous definition of barely started." "I have a realistic one." Beckett handed the brush to Owen and stood. "If you want to learn, I'll teach you. No pressure, but the offer stands." Eliza looked at him, at this man who kept offering her things she didn't know how to accept, and felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Doing what?" "All of it. The supplies, the repairs, riding through a blizzard to save us, letting us stay here, teaching Owen to brush horses and offering to teach me to ride. Why?" Beckett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I can't seem to help myself." That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Owen was still brushing the mare, oblivious to the tension building between the adults, and Eliza was grateful for the distraction. "I should get back inside," she said. "Help Mrs. Patterson with supper. She doesn't need help. Then I should check on the laundry. There isn't any laundry. Then I should—" "Eliza," Beckett's voice was soft. "You don't have to find reasons to leave." "I'm not—" "Yes, you are. Every time we get close to talking about this, about us, you find an excuse to walk away." "There is no us." The words came out harsher than she intended, and Beckett flinched. "Isn't there?" he asked. "No, there's you, and there's me, and there's a situation we're both trying to navigate without making it worse." "And you think talking about it would make it worse?" "I think talking about it would make it real." "It already is real." "No." Eliza shook her head. "This is a storm, a temporary situation. When the weather clears, I'll go back to my cabin, and you'll go back to your life, and everything will go back to the way it was." "Will it?" "It has to." "Why?" "Because anything else is impossible." Beckett took a step closer. "Why is it impossible?" "Because you're you and I'm me, and the world doesn't work the way you seem to think it does." "Then how does it work? Men like you don't end up with women like me. Not in any way that lasts. Not in any way that matters." Beckett's jaw tightened. "You think I'm playing at this? I think you're lonely, and I think I'm convenient. And I think when you realize that loneliness isn't a good enough reason to tie yourself to a poor widow with a failing homestead and a child who isn't yours, you'll walk away. And I don't—" Her voice cracked. "I don't know if I can survive that." Beckett stared at her, and Eliza saw something that looked like pain cross his face. "You think that's all this is?" he asked quietly. "Convenience? I don't know what this is. That's the problem." "Then let me tell you." Beckett's voice was rough. "This is me waking up every morning and thinking about you. This is me finding excuses to ride out to your place because I can't stand the thought of you struggling alone. This is me lying awake at night wondering if you're warm enough, if you're safe enough, if you're happy at all. This is me realizing that I've spent 10 years building an empire that means nothing compared to 10 minutes sitting at your table eating stew and listening to your son talk about horses." Eliza's breath caught. "So no," Beckett continued, "this isn't convenience. This isn't loneliness. This is me falling for you so hard I can't see straight, and I don't know what to do about it except keep showing up and hoping that eventually you'll believe me when I say I'm not going anywhere." Eliza opened her mouth, but no words came out. Owen chose that moment to announce he was done brushing the horse, completely unaware that he'd just interrupted the most important conversation of his mother's life. Beckett stepped back, his expression carefully neutral again. "I should check on the foreman," he said. "Make sure the cattle have enough feed." He left before Eliza could find her voice. She stood alone in the barn with Owen chattering beside her about how soft the mare's nose was, and realized she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because Beckett had just told her he was falling for her, and she'd responded by telling him it was impossible. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in the guest bed listening to Owen's soft breathing and staring at the ceiling while Beckett's words played on repeat in her mind. "This is me falling for you so hard I can't see straight." She'd spent 2 years building walls around herself, 2 years learning not to need anyone, 2 years convincing herself that being alone was safer than risking her heart on someone who might leave. And then Beckett Kane had walked into her life and dismantled every defense she'd constructed, brick by careful brick, until she was left standing exposed and terrified with nowhere to hide. The worst part was that she felt it too. Whatever was happening between them, this impossible, complicated thing she kept trying to deny, it was real. It had been real since the moment he'd stopped in that frozen street and offered to put supper on her table. Maybe even before that, in some way she hadn't recognized at the time. But real didn't mean possible. Real didn't mean it would work. And real certainly didn't mean it wouldn't destroy her when it ended. Eliza rolled onto her side and pulled the blanket tighter, even though the room was warm. Through the window, she could see that the snow had finally stopped. The sky was clearing, revealing stars so bright they looked like holes punched in black fabric. The storm was over, which meant tomorrow she'd have to go back. Back to her cabin with its broken stove and damaged roof. Back to reality. Back to being Eliza Mercer, struggling widow, instead of whoever she'd been pretending to be for the past 4 days. She must have finally dozed off, because when she opened her eyes again, pale morning light filled the room, and Owen's bed was empty. Eliza sat up, heart pounding. "Owen?" No answer. She threw off the blankets and hurried downstairs, her borrowed nightgown tangling around her legs. Voices drifted from the kitchen, Mrs. Patterson's steady murmur, and Owen's excited chatter, and a third voice that made Eliza's chest tighten. She stopped in the doorway. Owen sat at the kitchen table with a plate of eggs and bacon in front of him, talking a mile a minute about something while Mrs. Patterson cooked at the stove. Beckett leaned against the counter with a cup of coffee, listening to Owen with the same patient attention he always gave the boy. He looked tired, like maybe he hadn't slept either. "Mama!" Owen spotted her and waved. "Mrs. Patterson made breakfast, and Mr. Kane says we can go see the cattle today if the snow's not too deep. Does he now?" Eliza met Beckett's eyes across the room. "Only if it's all right with your mother," Beckett said carefully. The distance between them felt like a canyon. "We'll see," Eliza said. "First I need to check on the cabin, see what damage the storm did." "I sent 2 of my men over at first light," Beckett said. "They're working on the roof now." Eliza stiffened. "You had no right." "I had every right. You're staying under my roof. That means I'm responsible for making sure you have somewhere safe to go back to." "I didn't ask you to be responsible for me." "No. You never ask for anything. That's part of the problem." Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat loudly. "Perhaps this conversation would be better suited to somewhere that isn't my kitchen." Beckett pushed off the counter. "You're right. My apologies, Margaret." He looked at Eliza. "My office, if you don't mind." It wasn't really a question. Eliza followed him down the hall to a room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk covered in papers. Beckett closed the door behind them and crossed his arms. "Say what you need to say," Eliza said. "I'm not trying to control you." "Aren't you?" "I'm trying to help. There's a difference." "Not from where I'm standing." Beckett's jaw tightened. "What do you want from me, Eliza? You want me to stop caring whether your cabin falls down in the next storm? You want me to pretend I don't notice when you're struggling? You want me to walk away and let you handle everything alone because that's what you're used to? I want you to stop acting like I'm your responsibility." "Why? Because it scares you. Because it's not real." The words exploded out of her, louder than she intended, and Beckett went very still. "Not real," he repeated slowly. "You don't owe me anything, Beckett. You don't owe Owen anything. And whatever you think you feel, whatever this is, it's not going to last. Men like you don't choose women like me. Not in the long run. Not when reality sets in." "What reality?" "That I come with nothing. No money, no connections, no status. Just debt and a failing homestead and a child who needs more than I can give him. You think I care about any of that?" "I think you should." Beckett stared at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and stood so close she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at you," he said, his voice low and rough. "I see a woman who's survived 2 years that would have broken most people. I see someone who works herself to exhaustion every single day to give her son a home and a life. I see pride and strength and a stubbornness that drives me half crazy because you won't accept help even when you're drowning." Eliza's throat tightened. "Beckett." "I see someone who makes stew out of scraps and turns it into something good. Someone who patches a leaking roof and fixes broken fences and refuses to give up no matter how hard the world pushes back. I see someone who loves her son so much she'd walk through a blizzard to save him, even if it meant dying in the process." "Stop." "Why? Because it makes you uncomfortable to hear that you're worth something? Because it's not true. It is true. And the fact that you can't see it doesn't make it any less real." Eliza shook her head, tears burning in her eyes. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand. I can't let myself believe this. I can't let myself believe you." Her voice cracked. "Because when you leave, and you will leave, it's going to destroy me. And I can't survive being destroyed again." Beckett's expression softened. "Who hurt you this badly?" "What?" "Someone convinced you that you're not worth staying for. Someone made you believe that the only reason a man would be with you is convenience or pity or something temporary." "Who was it?" Eliza looked away. It doesn't matter. It does to me. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "My husband." Beckett went still. What? Thomas was a good man, a kind man. But he married me because I was there and willing, and it was time for him to settle down. He never loved me. Not really. He loved the idea of having a wife and eventually children, but he didn't love me. How do you know? Because he told me. Not in those exact words, but close enough. Eliza's hands clenched at her sides. He said I was a good partner, a good mother, a good manager of the household, but he never once said I was the person he couldn't live without. I was just the person who was there. Eliza? And when he died, I mourned him. But I also felt relieved, because I didn't have to pretend anymore that I was enough for someone who was only half committed to our life together. Beckett's hands came up to frame her face, gentle but firm, forcing her to look at him. I am not your husband, he said. I know. Do you? Because you keep acting like I'm going to wake up one day and realize you're not worth the trouble, like I'm going to get bored or find someone better or decide that this was all just a mistake. Aren't you? No. His thumbs brushed away the tears she hadn't realized were falling. I'm going to wake up every day and choose you, over and over again, until you believe me. You can't promise that. I can. And I am. Eliza wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly her chest ached with the wanting. But fear was a powerful thing, and it had lived in her bones for so long she didn't know how to let it go. I need time, she whispered. How much time? I don't know. Beckett studied her face for a long moment. Then he dropped his hands and stepped back, and Eliza felt the loss of his touch like a physical blow. Take all the time you need, he said. But I'm not going anywhere. Beckett, I mean it, Eliza. You can push me away. You can tell yourself this isn't real. You can build as many walls as you want, but I'm still going to be here when you're ready to let me in. He left the office before she could respond. Eliza stood alone, surrounded by books and papers and the lingering warmth of his presence, and realized she was making this harder than it needed to be. Because the truth was simple. She was falling for Beckett Kane. She'd been falling for him since the moment he'd shown up on her roof with a hammer and a stubborn refusal to let her struggle alone. And that terrified her more than anything else in the world. The ride back to the cabin was quiet. Beckett drove the wagon with Owen squeezed between him and Eliza on the bench, chattering about the horses and the cattle and whether Mr. Kane would really teach him to ride someday. Beckett answered patiently, but Eliza could feel the tension radiating off him in waves. When the cabin came into view, Eliza's heart sank. The roof had held, barely, but one of the windows had blown in and snow had drifted halfway across the floor inside. The chicken coop had collapsed entirely. And the stove, the source of all their problems, sat cold and dead with a crack running down the side that even Eliza could see meant it was finished. Two of Beckett's ranch hands were working on the roof, and they'd already cleared most of the snow from inside the cabin. But the damage was obvious. It's not as bad as it looks, one of them called down. Isn't it? Eliza asked. Roof's solid now. Window can be replaced, and Mr. Kane said to tell you he's ordering a new stove from Denver. Eliza turned to Beckett. You can't keep doing this. Doing what? Fixing everything, buying everything, acting like I'm a project you need to complete. You're not a project. Then what am I? Beckett climbed down from the wagon and came around to help her down. His hands closed around her waist, strong and steady, and for a moment they stood there in the snow with Owen already running toward the cabin to inspect the damage. You're someone I care about, Beckett said quietly. Someone I want to help. Is that really so terrible? It is when I can't repay you. I don't want repayment. Everyone wants something. Not from you. Eliza searched his face, looking for the lie, for the angle, for whatever hidden motive had to be lurking beneath all this generosity. She found nothing but sincerity, and somehow that was worse. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Do what? Let someone help me. Trust that there's no price attached. Believe that you're not going to hold all of this over my head someday when you want something I can't give. Beckett's hands tightened on her waist. Then let me prove it to you. How? By staying, by showing up every day, by being here until you believe that I mean what I say. And if I never believe it, then I'll still be here. Eliza didn't know what to say to that. She was saved from answering by Owen calling from inside the cabin, his voice bright with excitement despite the damage. "Mama, come look! The supplies didn't get wet!" Beckett released her, and Eliza hurried inside to find Owen standing beside the stacked provisions, grinning like they'd just discovered gold. "See? Everything's fine?" Everything was not fine. The cabin was a disaster. The floor was wet. The broken window let in frigid air. And without a working stove, they couldn't stay here. "Pack up what you need," Beckett said from the doorway. "You're coming back to Cane Ridge. You can't stay here. Not without heat. New stove won't arrive for at least a week, maybe 2. You'll freeze before then." "We'll manage." "No, you won't." Beckett's voice was firm. "And I'm not letting you try." "You can't just—" "Yes, I can, and I am. Pack your things. You and Owen are staying at the ranch until this place is livable again." Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle this on her own the way she'd handled everything else for the past 2 years. But Owen was watching her with wide, hopeful eyes, and the cabin was so cold she could see her breath. And Beckett was standing there with that stubborn set to his jaw that said he wasn't backing down no matter what she said. "1 week," she said finally, "however long it takes." "1 week," she repeated firmly, "and then we come back here whether the stove's arrived or not. We'll see." "Don't will see me like I'm a child. I'm agreeing to 1 week. That's it." Beckett smiled faintly. 1 week. Understood. It took less than an hour to pack what they needed: clothes, a few of Owen's treasures, the food that hadn't spoiled. Beckett's men finished securing the roof and boarded up the broken window while Eliza and Owen gathered their things. When they were ready to leave, Eliza took one last look at the cabin. It looked small and sad, and impossibly fragile against the vast white landscape surrounding it. But it was hers, and she wasn't ready to give up on it yet. The return to Cane Ridge felt different this time, less like a rescue and more like a surrender. Eliza tried to tell herself it was temporary, 1 week, maybe 2, just until the stove arrived and the cabin was warm enough to inhabit again. But as they pulled up to the ranch house and Mrs. Patterson came out to greet them with warm towels and hot coffee, Eliza felt something inside her shift. This was dangerous. Not because Beckett was dangerous, though in some ways he was, but because it would be so easy to get used to this. To help. To warmth. To not being alone. And when it ended, the loss would be unbearable. That night, after Owen was asleep, Eliza found Beckett in his office going over ledgers. "Can I come in?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Of course." Eliza stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I need to say something." "All right. I'm grateful for everything you've done, for saving us from the storm, for fixing the cabin, for letting us stay here. But I need you to understand that this can't be permanent." "Why not?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Why can't it be permanent?" "Because I have a home. A cabin with a broken stove and a leaking roof. It's still mine. It could be ours." Eliza's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Beckett set down his pen and stood. "I'm saying I don't want you to go back there. I'm saying I want you here. You and Owen. Not as guests, not as charity cases, but as family. Beckett, we barely know each other. I know enough. You don't. You know what I've let you see, but you don't know the hard parts, the ugly parts, the parts that drove my husband to settle for me instead of love me. Then let me see them. Why? Because I'm not afraid of your hard parts, Eliza. I'm afraid of losing you before I get the chance to prove that none of them matter." Eliza shook her head. "This is moving too fast." "Is it? We've known each other for 3 months. I've spent more time with you and Owen than I've spent with anyone in years. I know what you look like when you're angry. I know how you sound when you're scared. I know you take your coffee black, and you hate asking for help, and you'd rather starve than accept charity from someone you don't trust. That's not the same as knowing someone." "Then what is?" "I don't know!" The words burst out of her, sharp and desperate. "I don't know what any of this is supposed to look like because I've never had it before. I married a man who was kind but distant. I built a life that was comfortable but empty. And when he died, I thought I was free. But I'm not free. I'm just alone. And I've gotten used to that. I've gotten good at it. And now you're here asking me to give that up and trust you with something I'm not sure I even have to give. Beckett crossed the room and took her hands in his. What if you do have it? He asked quietly. What if you have more to give than you realize? What if the only thing stopping you is fear? Fear is a good reason to stop. Not always. How do you know? Because I'm afraid too. Terrified, actually, but I'm doing this anyway. Eliza looked up at him. Doing what? Falling in love with you. The world seemed to tilt. You don't love me, Eliza whispered. Yes, I do. You can't. It's too soon. Then I don't care about timelines. Beckett's hands tightened on hers. I care about the fact that you make me laugh, that you challenge me when I'm being stubborn, that you've built a life out of nothing and refuse to let the world break you. I care about the way Owen looks at you, like you hung the moon. I care about the fact that for the first time in 10 years, I wake up looking forward to the day instead of just enduring it. Beckett, you don't have to say it back. You don't have to feel the same way. But I needed you to know. Because I'm done pretending this is anything other than what it is. Eliza stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She should pull away, should protect herself, should rebuild the walls he'd torn down and guard her heart before it was too late. But it was already too late. She'd fallen for him weeks ago, maybe even months ago, and no amount of fear was going to change that. I'm terrified, she whispered. I know. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I. What if it doesn't work? What if it does? Eliza searched his face. This man who'd ridden through a blizzard to save her, who'd fixed her roof and taught her son to brush horses and looked at her like she was worth staying for. And she made a choice. She stepped forward, rose up on her toes, and kissed him. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't smooth, it was clumsy and desperate and flavored with salt from the tears she didn't realize she was crying. But Beckett kissed her back like she was air, and he'd been drowning, his hands coming up to frame her face, gentle despite the intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Beckett rested his forehead against hers. Was that a yes? He asked. It was a maybe. I'll take it. Eliza laughed through her tears. You're impossible. So are you. We'll figure it out together. And standing there in Beckett's office with his hands on her face and his heart laid bare, Eliza thought that maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe they would figure it out. But 3 days later, everything fell apart. Vernon Hale came back, and this time he brought the sheriff. Eliza was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Patterson prepare lunch when she heard the commotion outside. Raised voices, the sound of horses, and then Beckett's voice, low and controlled in a way that made her stomach drop. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window. 3 men sat on horseback in front of the house. Vernon Hale looked smug, a weasel in a suit who'd finally found the angle he was looking for. Beside him sat a heavy-set man with a badge pinned to his vest, Sheriff Tom Brennan, who Eliza recognized from town. And the third man was someone she didn't know, dressed too fine for Wyoming and carrying himself with the kind of Eastern arrogance that set her teeth on edge. Beckett stood on the porch steps, his arms crossed, and his expression carved from stone. What's this about, Tom? Beckett asked. The sheriff shifted in his saddle, looking uncomfortable. Got a complaint filed, Beck. Have to follow up on it. What complaint? Vernon spoke up, his voice carrying across the yard. Mrs. Mercer's property is in violation of the Homestead Act, abandoned for more than 6 months. That makes it available for claim. Eliza's blood went cold. That's a lie, Beckett said flatly. She's been working that land continuously. Has she? Vernon pulled a paper from his coat. Because I have 3 witnesses who will testify the cabin's been empty for weeks. No smoke from the chimney, no livestock maintained, no visible cultivation. Looks abandoned to me. She's staying here because of the storm damage. Convenient excuse. Vernon's smile was sharp. Or maybe she's abandoned her claim to take up residence with you. Either way, the result's the same. The land's forfeit. Like hell it is. The law's the law, Mr. Kane. The Eastern gentleman spoke up, his voice smooth and practiced. I'm James Whitmore, representing the Sheridan Land Development Company. We've filed the proper paperwork to claim the abandoned property. Everything's been done legally. Eliza didn't wait to hear more. She burst through the front door, not caring that she was still wearing her apron or that her hair was half falling from its pins. That land is not abandoned, she said. All three men turned to look at her, and Vernon's smile widened. Mrs. Mercer, how convenient. Perhaps you can explain why you've been living at Cane Ridge for the better part of 2 weeks instead of maintaining your own homestead. I was trapped by the storm. My stove broke. Mr. Kane was kind enough to offer shelter until repairs could be made. How charitable of him. Vernon's tone suggested he thought it was anything but. And how long were you planning to stay in his home, exactly? Until my cabin is livable. Which could be months, based on the damage reports I've received. It won't be months. No? Because I've had men watching that property, Mrs. Mercer. No one's been there in days. No work's being done. No maintenance. Nothing that suggests you have any intention of returning. That's because we've been snowed in. Or because you found a wealthier arrangement. Vernon glanced meaningfully at Beckett, and the implication made Eliza's face burn. Beckett took a step forward, and Eliza recognized the deadly calm in his posture. Say that again. Gentlemen, Sheriff Brennan interrupted quickly, let's keep this civil. There's nothing civil about calling a woman's character into question, Beckett said, his voice quiet and dangerous. I'm calling facts into question, Vernon replied. Mrs. Mercer abandoned her claim. That makes it available for purchase. We've filed the proper paperwork, and we're prepared to compensate her for any improvements made to the land. You're not taking her land. It's not her land anymore, Mr. Kane. It's ours. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Eliza felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Everything she'd fought for, the cabin, the homestead, the life she'd tried to build for Owen, was being taken away by a technicality and three men who saw opportunity in her suffering. This is my home, she said, her voice shaking. I've worked that land for 2 years. I've paid the filing fees. I've met every requirement. Except the residency requirement, Whitmore said smoothly, which states that the claimant must maintain continuous residence on the property. You haven't been in residence for nearly 2 weeks. Because of a storm. Intent doesn't matter, Mrs. Mercer. Only facts. And the fact is, you abandoned your claim. I didn't abandon anything. Then where have you been sleeping? Vernon asked pointedly. Because it hasn't been in your cabin. Beckett's hands clenched at his sides. Tom, you can't seriously be entertaining this. The sheriff looked pained. Beck, I don't like it any more than you do. But if they've filed the paperwork and the land's been abandoned, it hasn't been abandoned. Then Mrs. Mercer needs to return to it, today, and maintain residence until the claim's solidified. The cabin doesn't have heat. That's not my problem, Beck. That's hers. Eliza felt like she'd been punched. The sheriff wasn't cruel. He was just doing his job, but the result was the same. She had to choose between her land and her safety, between her home and freezing to death trying to keep it. How long do I have? She asked quietly. Whitmore consulted his papers. Eviction notice will be posted in 48 hours if you don't resume residence. After that, the property becomes available for immediate purchase. This is robbery. This is business, Mrs. Mercer. Nothing personal. But it was personal. Eliza could see it in Vernon's eyes, and the satisfaction he took from watching her world crumble. This wasn't about the land. This was about hurting her, about punishing Beckett through her. Get off my property, Beckett said coldly. Gladly. Vernon tipped his hat with mock courtesy. Pleasure doing business with you, Mrs. Mercer. I do hope you'll consider our offer to purchase. It's far more generous than you deserve. The three men rode away, leaving Eliza and Beckett standing in the yard with the sheriff looking apologetic and the world collapsing around them. I'm sorry, Beck, Tom said. My hands are tied. I know. The sheriff rode off, and Eliza stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Beckett turned to her. We'll fight this. How? I'll hire a lawyer. We'll prove you didn't abandon the claim. We'll show that the storm made it impossible to stay there safely. It won't matter. Eliza's voice was hollow. They filed the paperwork. They have witnesses. And I've been living here instead of there. Because you had no choice. Intent doesn't matter. That man said so himself. Beckett grabbed her shoulders. Then we'll go back. Today. Right now. We'll move you into the cabin and prove you never abandoned it. There's no heat, Beckett, no working stove. Owen and I will freeze. Then I'll buy you a temporary stove. Or we'll bring in a portable heater. Or I'll camp there with you and keep a fire burning around the clock. I don't care what it takes. We're not letting them steal your land. Eliza looked at him, at this man who was willing to fight impossible battles for her, and felt something break inside. This is my fault, she whispered. What? No. I should have stayed at the cabin, should have figured out the stove myself, should have refused your help and handled it alone like I always have. You would have died. Maybe. But at least I'd still have my land. That's not a trade worth making, isn't it? Eliza pulled away from him. That land is all I have, Beckett. It's Owen's inheritance, his future. And I've lost it because I was too weak to survive a storm on my own. You're not weak, you're human. There's a difference. Not in the eyes of the law, apparently. Beckett reached for her again, but Eliza stepped back. I need to think, she said. Eliza, please, just give me some time to think. She walked back into the house before he could argue, her heart pounding and her mind racing. Vernon Hale had won, unless she could figure out a way to beat him at his own game. That night, Eliza sat in the guest room staring at the wall while Owen slept. She'd spent hours going over every option, every possibility, every angle she could think of to save her land. She could move back to the cabin tomorrow, endure the cold, risk Owen's health, prove she'd never abandoned the claim. But even if she survived, Vernon's witnesses would still testify against her. The paperwork was already filed, and fighting it in court would cost money she didn't have. She could accept Vernon's offer to purchase, take whatever pittance he offered, and walk away. But that felt like surrender, like admitting that men with money could take whatever they wanted from people who had nothing to fight back with. Or she could do the one thing she'd been avoiding since this whole mess started. She could ask Beckett for help, real help. Not fixing a roof or bringing supplies, but using his money and influence to fight this battle for her. The thought made her sick, because if she did that, if she let Beckett solve this problem with his wealth and power, she'd be proving Vernon right. She'd be the poor widow who'd attached herself to a rich man and used him to get what she wanted. And worse, she'd lose the last shred of independence she had left. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she said quietly. Beckett opened the door and stepped inside, closing it gently behind him. Can't sleep? No, neither can I. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful to keep distance between them. I've been thinking. So have I. Let me buy the land from them. Eliza's head snapped up. What? Let me buy it. I'll pay whatever they're asking, triple it if I have to, then I'll deed it back to you, free and clear. No. Eliza, no, I won't let you do that. Why not? Because it proves everyone right. Her voice rose despite her efforts to keep it quiet. It proves that I'm with you for your money, that I'm using you, that everything Vernon said is true. Who cares what Vernon says? I do. I care what people think. I care that my son will grow up hearing whispers about how his mother sold herself to a rich man to keep a piece of land. That's not what this is, isn't it? Eliza stood, pacing the small room. If you buy that land for me, what does that make us? What does that make this thing between us? It makes us people who care about each other, people who help each other. Or it makes me a kept woman and you the fool who's keeping her. Beckett stood too, his jaw tight. I don't give a damn what people call us. Well, I do, because I have to live in this town. Owen has to grow up here, and I won't let him carry the shame of his mother being bought. I'm not buying you. I'm buying land. It's the same thing, and you know it. They stared at each other across the small room, both breathing hard, both trapped by impossible circumstances and pride that wouldn't bend. Then what do you want to do? Beckett asked finally. I don't know. We're running out of time. I know. 48 hours, Eliza. That's all we have. I know. The words came out as a shout, and Eliza immediately lowered her voice. I know, and I'm trying to figure out what to do, but every option feels like losing. Beckett crossed the room and took her hands. Then lose the land. Eliza stared at him. What? Lose the land. Walk away. Let Vernon have it. I can't. Yes, you can. It's just land, Eliza. Just dirt and wood and a creek that freezes every winter. It's not worth dying for. It's not worth sacrificing yourself for. It's Owen's future. No, you're Owen's future. You, not that cabin, not that homestead. You. Eliza shook her head, tears burning in her eyes. You don't understand. Then make me understand. That land is the only thing I've ever owned. The only thing that's truly mine. My husband's name might be on the deed, but I'm the one who's worked it. I'm the one who's bled for it. I'm the one who's turned it from a dream into something real. And if I lose it, I lose the only proof I have that I'm worth something. You're worth everything, Beckett said fiercely. With or without that land, with or without anything. You're worth everything, and the fact that you can't see that breaks my heart. Beckett, marry me. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Eliza froze. What? Marry me. Right now. Today. We'll ride into Sheridan and find the preacher and make this official. Have you lost your mind? Maybe. But if you're my wife, that land becomes community property. They can't take it from you without taking it from me. And Vernon Hale isn't stupid enough to go after my property. Eliza pulled her hands free. That's insane. Is it? Yes. You can't marry me just to save my land. I'm not marrying you to save your land. I'm marrying you because I love you. The land is just a convenient bonus. We barely know each other. I know enough. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Eliza's voice cracked. You sweeping in and solving all my problems and making me dependent on you in ways I can't escape from. Marriage isn't a trap, Eliza. It can be. It was for me before. Beckett flinched like she'd slapped him. I'm not your first husband. I know, but I'm still the same woman. Still the one who wasn't enough to be loved the first time. What makes you think this time will be different? Because I'm not him, Beckett's voice rose. I'm not settling for you. I'm choosing you. And I'll keep choosing you every single day until you believe that you're not just worth staying for, you're worth fighting for. Eliza wanted to believe him, wanted it so desperately she could taste it. But fear was louder than hope, and it screamed that this was a mistake, that marrying Beckett would mean losing herself entirely, that she'd become Mrs. Kane instead of Eliza Mercer, and whatever fragments of independence she still clung to would disappear completely. I can't, she whispered. Beckett stared at her. Can't or won't. Does it matter? Yeah, it does. Eliza looked away. I need more time. We don't have more time. We have 48 hours. Then I guess we're both going to lose. Beckett was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to the door and paused with his hand on the latch. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, I think you're wrong. I think you're letting fear make your decisions instead of hope. And I think you're going to regret this. Maybe I will. That doesn't make you feel better? No, but it's familiar. And right now, familiar feels safer than anything else. Beckett left without another word, and Eliza stood alone in the guest room with her pride intact and her heart in pieces. The next morning, Eliza woke with a plan. It wasn't a good plan. It probably wasn't even a smart plan, but it was the only one that let her keep both her land and her dignity. She was going back to the cabin. She found Owen at breakfast and pulled him aside. Pack your things, sweetheart. We're going home. Owen's face lit up. Really? Really? But what about the stove? We'll manage without it for a few days. Owen frowned. Mama, it's cold. I know, but we're tough. We'll bundle up and keep the fire going and make do until the new stove arrives. Can Mr. Kane come with us? Eliza's throat tightened. No, baby. This is something we need to do on our own. She found Beckett in his office and told him her plan. He listened without interrupting, his face expressionless. You'll freeze, he said when she finished. Maybe. But I'll still have my land. That's not a trade worth making. It's my trade to make. Beckett stood and crossed his arms. I'll send men with you. They can help set up a temporary shelter, get a fire going. No. Eliza, no, Beckett, I have to do this myself. If your men are there, Vernon's witnesses will say you're still supporting me, that I'm still dependent on you. The only way to prove I haven't abandoned my claim is to be there, alone. No help, no interference. You're being stubborn. I'm being smart. You're being suicidal. Then that's my choice. Her voice rose. My choice, Beckett. Not yours. Mine. And I need you to respect that. Beckett stared at her for a long moment. Then he walked to his desk and pulled out a thick envelope. If you're going to do this, at least take this. What is it? Money. Enough to buy a temporary stove or hire someone to fix the chimney or whatever else you need. I can't take your money. It's not mine. It's a loan. You can pay me back when you're able. Beckett, please. His voice cracked on the word. Please let me do this one thing. I know you need to prove you can handle this alone. I know you need to show Vernon and everyone else that you're not dependent on me. But please don't refuse help that could keep you and Owen alive. Eliza looked at the envelope, then at Beckett's face, and she saw something there that made her decision easier. Fear. Not fear for himself, fear for her. Okay, she said quietly. I'll take it. Relief flooded Beckett's expression. Thank you. But I'm paying you back. Every cent. I know you will. They stood in awkward silence, both knowing there were 1,000 things that needed to be said, and neither knowing how to say them. Finally, Eliza stepped forward and kissed him on the cheek. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Then she left before she could change her mind. The ride back to the cabin felt like a funeral procession. Owen sat quietly beside her in the wagon Beckett had insisted she take, sensing his mother's mood even if he didn't understand it. The sky was clear and cold, and the world stretched white and endless in every direction. When the cabin came into view, Eliza's heart sank. It looked even worse than she remembered, small and fragile and entirely inadequate against the harsh reality of a Wyoming winter. But it was hers, and she was going to keep it. She spent the rest of the day preparing, built a fire in the fireplace even though it wasn't designed to heat the whole cabin, stuffed every gap in the walls with rags and spare fabric, moved their beds closer to the hearth, opened Beckett's envelope and counted out enough money to buy a small temporary stove from the mercantile. By nightfall, they had heat, not much, but enough to survive. Owen fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the move and the cold. Eliza sat by the fire watching the flames dance and trying not to think about Beckett sitting alone in his big empty house, wondering if she was all right. She'd made her choice. Now she had to live with it. The second day was harder. The temperature dropped overnight, and the fire ate through wood faster than Eliza had anticipated. She spent most of the day splitting logs and hauling them inside, her hands blistered and her back aching. Owen helped where he could, but he was 7 and small and the work was beyond him. By sunset, Eliza was exhausted, but she'd proven her point. She was here, she was maintaining the property, and Vernon Hale could go to hell. She was banking the fire for the night when she heard hoofbeats outside. Her heart leapt. Beckett, but when she opened the door, she found Sheriff Brennan sitting on his horse with Vernon Hale beside him. Mrs. Mercer, the sheriff said, mind if we have a word? I'm in residence, Eliza said flatly. As you can see. So I do. Tom climbed down from his horse. Can I come in? Eliza stepped aside and the sheriff entered. Vernon stayed outside smirking. Tom looked around his cabin, at the makeshift bedding by the fire, the temporary stove Eliza had installed that morning, the wood stacked high against the wall. You're really doing this, he said. Yes. Eliza, this isn't safe. It's my home. It's a death trap. Tom lowered his voice. Please, be reasonable. You've got a boy to think about. I am thinking about him. I'm thinking about the future he deserves, the land he should inherit. What good is land if you're both dead from cold? We're not going to die. You might. And if you do, it'll be on my conscience. Eliza met his eyes. Then I absolve you. Whatever happens here is my choice, not yours. Tom sighed heavily. You're as stubborn as Beck said you were. He's been talking about me? Came to see me yesterday. Tried to convince me to delay the eviction notice. Said you deserved more time. What did you tell him? Same thing I'm telling you. Law's the law. If you're in residence, the claim stands. If you're not, it doesn't. There's no middle ground. Then it's a good thing I'm here. Tom looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he just nodded. All right, I'll note in my report that you've resumed residence. That should stop the eviction. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Vernon's not going to give up that easy. Let him try. Tom left, and Eliza closed the door behind him with shaking hands. She'd won. For now. But Vernon's smirk stayed with her long into the night, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The third day, disaster struck. Eliza woke to Owen coughing. Not the normal morning clearing his throat cough, but deep rattling sounds that came from his chest and made him wince with each breath. Owen? She pressed a hand to his forehead and felt heat radiating from his skin. Baby, how do you feel? Cold, Mama. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. So cold. Eliza's heart dropped into her stomach. Fever. Owen had a fever. She spent the day trying everything she knew. Cool cloths on his forehead, warm broth to keep his strength up, blankets to stop the shivering. But nothing worked. By evening, Owen's fever had climbed higher, and the coughing had gotten worse. Mama? Owen's eyes were glassy. Is Mr. Kane coming? Not tonight, sweetheart. I miss him. I know, me too. Owen coughed again, and Eliza heard fluid in his lungs. Pneumonia. Her son had pneumonia. And it was her fault. She'd brought him back here to prove a point, to save her pride, to show the world she didn't need help. And now Owen was dying because of it. Eliza didn't let herself think. She bundled Owen in every blanket she owned, carried him to the wagon, and drove through the darkness toward Cane Ridge. The ride took 30 minutes that felt like hours. Owen drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing labored and his skin burning hot against her chest. When Cane Ridge finally appeared, Eliza nearly sobbed with relief. She pulled the wagon right up to the house and started screaming. Beckett! Help! Please! The door flew open and Beckett appeared, took one look at Owen in her arms, and moved faster than she'd ever seen him move. Inside. Now. He took Owen from her and carried him straight to the guest room. Margaret, hot water and clean cloths, and send someone for the doctor. Mrs. Patterson appeared instantly, took one look at Owen, and ran. Beckett laid Owen on the bed and started stripping away the layers of blankets. How long has he been like this? Since this morning. Why didn't you come sooner? I thought I could handle it. Beckett looked at her, and Eliza saw fury and fear warring in his eyes. You almost killed him. I know. For what? Land? Pride? Some stupid idea that you have to do everything yourself? I know! Do you? Beckett's voice rose. Because from where I'm standing, you nearly sacrificed your son to prove a point. I was trying to protect him. By letting him freeze in a broken cabin? By keeping his home? Eliza's voice cracked. By making sure he has something when I'm gone. He doesn't need land, Eliza. He needs you. Alive and whole, and here. Owen coughed weakly, and both of them fell silent. The doctor arrived an hour later, examined Owen, and confirmed what Eliza already knew. Pneumonia, brought on by exposure to cold. Keep him warm, the doctor said, plenty of fluids, and pray. He left medicine and instructions and a look that said he didn't think Owen's chances were good. Eliza sat by Owen's bed and didn't move for 3 days. She bathed his forehead when the fever spiked. She forced medicine down his throat when he could swallow. She held his hand and talked to him even when he couldn't respond. And she prayed to every force in the universe that might be listening that her son would survive the consequences of her pride. Beckett came and went, bringing food she didn't eat and water she barely touched. He didn't lecture her, didn't remind her that this was her fault. He just stayed. On the 4th day, Owen's fever broke. On the 5th day, he opened his eyes and asked for water. On the 6th day, he smiled. And Eliza collapsed beside his bed and cried until she had nothing left. When she finally pulled herself together, she found Beckett in his office. He's going to be okay, she said. I know, Margaret told me. Eliza sat in the chair across from his desk. I'm sorry. For what? For almost killing him. For being stubborn. For thinking I could do everything alone. You're not alone. Beckett's voice was quiet. You've never been alone. You've just been too afraid to admit you needed help. I know. Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. I thought keeping the land meant keeping my independence, my dignity, proof that I was worth something. But I almost lost Owen because of it. And that land, that stupid piece of dirt I've been fighting so hard to keep, isn't worth my son's life. No, it's not. So I'm done fighting. Vernon can have it. I'll sign whatever papers he wants. I'll walk away. As long as Owen is safe, nothing else matters. Beckett stood and walked around the desk. He crouched in front of her and took her hands. You don't have to do that, he said. Yes, I do. No, you don't, because I bought the land. Eliza stared at him. What? 2 days ago, while you were sitting with Owen, I rode into Sheridan, found Vernon Hale, and bought your homestead from the Sheridan Land Development Company. Beckett, no. It's done, Eliza. Deed's already filed. The land is mine. You had no right? I had every right. Because I love you. And I love Owen. And I'll be damned if I let you lose everything because you're too proud to accept help. Eliza pulled her hands free and stood, pacing the room. This is exactly what I didn't want. I know. I told you not to. I know. And you did it anyway. Yes. Why? Because someone had to save you from yourself. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, both furious and frustrated, and standing at a crossroads neither knew how to navigate. I can't be with you if you're going to make decisions for me, Eliza said finally. And I can't be with you if you're going to refuse help until it kills you. Then maybe we can't be together at all. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Beckett's face went very still. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want anymore. Yes, you do. You're just too scared to admit it. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm terrified of letting you in completely because I know what it feels like to be with someone who only half wants me, and I can't survive that again. I'm not half committed, Eliza. I'm all in. I bought your land. I'm offering you my home. I'm asking you to marry me. What more do I have to do to prove I'm not going anywhere? Trust me to make my own choices, even when they're wrong. Beckett was quiet for a long moment. Even if those choices hurt you? Yes. Even if they hurt Owen? Eliza flinched. That's not fair. Neither is asking me to stand by and watch you destroy yourself. They were at an impasse, and both of them knew it. Finally, Beckett walked to his desk and pulled out a paper. The deed to your land. It's in my name now, but I'll sign it over to you. No conditions, no strings. It'll be yours free and clear. Beckett, on one condition. What condition? You marry me. Eliza's breath caught. That's not fair, Life's not fair. But this is the deal. You marry me, and I sign over the deed. You get your land and your independence and the proof you need that you're worth something, and I get you. That's not a fair trade, isn't it? Beckett's eyes held hers. Because from where I'm standing, I'm getting everything I want, and you're getting everything you need. What if it doesn't work? Then we'll figure it out together. What if I'm not enough? You're more than enough. You're everything. Eliza wanted to believe him, wanted to take the risk, wanted to choose hope over fear for the first time in her life. But old wounds ran deep, and trust was the hardest thing she'd ever been asked to give. I need time, she whispered. You have it. Take all the time you need, but the offer stands. Marry me, and I'll give you everything, your land, your independence, a future for Owen, and a partner who'll stand beside you no matter what. He left the deed on the desk and walked out, leaving Eliza alone with the most important decision of her life. She spent the next week helping Owen recover and thinking about what she wanted, what she deserved, what kind of life she could build if she was brave enough to reach for it. Owen recovered quickly, his resilience putting her own fears to shame. He asked about Beckett constantly, and Eliza saw the way his face lit up whenever Beckett visited. Her son had already chosen. The only question was whether Eliza was brave enough to make the same choice. On the 8th day, she found Beckett in the barn grooming the chestnut mare. I have an answer, she said. Beckett set down the brush and turned to face her. All right. Yes. Yes, what? Yes, I'll marry you. Eliza's voice shook. But not because of the land, and not because I need you to save me, but because I love you, and because I'm tired of being afraid. And because Owen deserves to grow up seeing what it looks like when two people choose each other every single day. Beckett crossed the barn in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. You're sure? He asked against her hair. No, I'm terrified, but I'm sure anyway. He laughed, a sound of pure relief, and kissed her. And Eliza kissed him back, pouring every ounce of fear and hope and desperate, terrified love into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Beckett rested his forehead against hers. "I'll sign over the deed tomorrow," he said. "Keep it." "What?" "Keep the deed, or put both our names on it. I don't care. Because I'm done trying to prove I don't need you. I do need you, and that's okay, because you need me too." "I do." "So we'll figure it out together. The land, the cabin, this life we're building, all of it. Together," Beckett agreed. They were married 2 weeks later in the parlor at Cane Ridge, with Owen standing between them and Mrs. Patterson crying in the corner. It wasn't a fancy wedding, no guests from town, no elaborate dress, just a preacher and a promise and two people choosing each other despite every reason fear gave them not to. Afterward, Beckett signed the deed to the homestead over to both of them, joint ownership, equal shares, and Eliza felt something inside her finally settle. This was hers, but it was also theirs, and that made all the difference. They spent the spring rebuilding the cabin, not replacing it with something grand, but strengthening what was already there. New roof, solid stove, reinforced walls, a home that could withstand whatever winter threw at it. Owen thrived under Beckett's patient teaching, learning to ride and work cattle and carve horses that actually looked like horses instead of lumpy blocks of wood. And Eliza learned something she'd never expected: that needing someone didn't make you weak, that accepting help wasn't surrender, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let yourself be loved. Vernon Hale tried to make trouble, spreading rumors, questioning the marriage's legitimacy, suggesting Beckett had been manipulated, but the territory didn't care. People saw the way Beckett looked at Eliza, the way he worked the homestead alongside her instead of replacing it with his own empire, the way Owen called him Pa and meant it, and slowly, grudgingly, Sheridan accepted them. By the following winter, people no longer whispered about the poor widow who'd caught a rich man. They talked about the couple who'd chosen each other against all odds, about the cattleman who'd found something more valuable than land, about the woman who'd survived loss and poverty and pride to build something real. On a clear January morning, Eliza stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching Beckett teach Owen to break ice on the water trough. The homestead was thriving, the cattle were healthy, and the life they'd built together felt more solid than any deed or document ever could. Beckett looked up and caught her watching. He smiled, that small, private smile he reserved just for her, and Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest. She'd spent so long believing she wasn't worth staying for. But Beckett had proven her wrong, every single day, through blizzards and sickness and pride that nearly destroyed them both. He'd stayed, not because he had to, not because he owed her anything, but because he'd chosen her, and she'd finally been brave enough to choose him back. Owen ran toward the cabin, his breath fogging in the cold air, shouting something about the new calf that had been born overnight. Beckett followed at a slower pace, his eyes on Eliza the whole time. And when he reached the porch, he pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "You all right?" he asked. "Better than all right," Eliza said. "I'm home." "Yeah." Beckett looked out at the land they'd fought so hard to keep. "We both are." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eliza believed it. Home wasn't just a place. It was the people you chose and who chose you back. It was the life you built together through storms and fear and the terrifying act of trusting someone else with your heart. It was this, right here, right now. And it was worth every risk she'd taken to find it.